Well, good morning. Welcome to church. Welcome to the bridge. It is great to have you with us this morning. If you are new with us, my name is Chris, and I have the honor and privilege of serving on staff here. And if you are new with us, whether you're in person or watching online, we're just so thrilled that you're with us. If you're online, we'd love for you to let us know that you're watching. And the best way to do that is to head to our website. On the main page, you will see a New Here button. We'd love for you to hit that and let us know a little bit about yourself. If you are in the service with us, we'd love to get to know you as well. And the best way to do so is to go visit one of our guest service people at the New Here kiosk. They'd love to say hello, and they'd even love to give you a free gift. It's our way to say thank you so much for spending an hour of your Sunday with us. Now, before we go into the music, I have to do something that we don't usually do, and that is a bit of a disclaimer. So, for those of you who don't know, we have been in a series called Confessions of a Pastor, and we've been having some very blunt and real conversations. If you've missed either of the last 2 weeks, I highly encourage you at some point later on this week, go to the on-demand section of our website and check it out. But today, we are talking about sex, and we are talking about the fact that it is all around us. Not just in movies or in music, but you can hardly walk around the mall without being confronted by it. So that is what we're talking about today, and I want to let you know that, so that if you have little kids with you, or if you have little kids with you online, might be a good idea to let them go in another room right now. But if you have little kids here, I want to let you know that down in the kids wing, we have an amazing program for them. Everywhere from birth to grade 5, it is a fun, safe, amazing opportunity for them to just dive in with people their own age and learn about things that apply to them and make the scriptures real to them. So if you've got a little one with you, highly encourage you during the next couple songs to go down there, get them signed in. It is not too late. But for the rest of you, we're going to start off with some singing. So I'm going to invite you to stand up and sing with the band, House of the Lord.
The God who was, we worship the God who is, we worship the God who evermore will be. He opened the prison doors, he parted the raging seas. My God, he holds the victory. Yeah. There's joy in the house of the Lord, there's joy in the house of the Lord today, and we won't be quiet. Shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God
go ahead and grab a seat. Well, as many of you know, in just over a week away, we have Kids Camp coming up. And yeah, I know, it's gonna be exciting. We have over 200 little ones signed up to just take over this place. It is gonna be absolutely amazing. I tell you that for a couple reasons. One, be praying. Be praying. It's gonna take a lot of coffee to keep up with them, but it's gonna be a lot of fun. It's gonna be an amazing time to spend with these guys. They've got so much energy and excitement and questions, and it's just an awesome week that we get to spend with them. We also get to interact with their families. Really, next to Christmas Eve, this is the biggest interaction we have with our community. Again, 200 kids plus parents that we're gonna get to interact with and have conversations with. It is absolutely fantastic. So please be praying for this. Please be praying, not just so us who are helping out and volunteering can stay awake, but be praying that we have amazing conversations with these little ones and with their parents, and that they'd have fun and that they enjoy their time, but also be able to be a time where we can introduce them to their Lord and Savior. Be praying over this event. But I also want to thank you for those who give regularly. You help make things like this happen. You really do. You might not attend the camp, you might not see it, you might see a picture now and then or follow us on social media, but you may have no ideas. But when you give, you help support that event that we do. Really, we do not charge nearly enough to cover what we spend. And we do that because we want to make sure that we are providing an awesome experience for our community and having it at a price point where really anybody can participate. And you do that through your giving. So thank you for those who give. Thank you for those who give your time as well. We have all sorts of volunteers. There's no way we come anywhere close to making this happen just on staff or on energy alone. We have volunteers and we have high school students. Some of the adults actually take the week off work just to help out at this event, at this camp, and make it an amazing experience for these kids. So thank you. Those who give their time, those who give financially, thank you so much. We have one other area we need you to give in. Again, it's your time, but it's this coming week. It's a week before Kids Camp. We have Build Week, where we have an opportunity to transform this place, and it is going to be absolutely incredible. So if you are handy, if you're able to help us transform this place, maybe you can paint, maybe you can help build some things, we would love for you to be a part of our Build team this week. So if you'd be interested in helping out with the Build team or giving financially, again, go to thebridgechurches.ca/top3, scan one of the many QR codes around the building for the top 3, and we'd love for you to participate in what we are doing. It's gonna be a great week. Please be praying for it. All right, we are in week 3 of Confessions of a Pastor. Check it out.
This is Scott Landry. Husband, father, dog lover,
your mother will walk you,
ordained minister and lead pastor of the Bridge. And drinker of Starbucks coffee, the brew that is 100% responsible for the Scott Landry that we all know and love. There he is.
All right. Well, I'm excited to announce today that we've gotten some corporate sponsorship. Wouldn't that be nice? I spend so much money there and spend so much time there, you'd think we'd have it by now. And again, this isn't an endorsement for Starbucks, so if you happen to be one of those poor people that, drink out of the toilet called Tim Hortons, too soon? Too early for that? Okay, it's a Canadian thing to do. I know, nobody's perfect. Listen, no, today I got to confess, I honestly don't know. That's a typical Sunday morning for me. Get up at 4 o'clock and roll out of bed and get here and tired and groggy and cranky. And then, those first couple sips of Pike's Place from Starbucks just perk me up. And I don't know how I would get through a Sunday morning without coffee. In fact, I don't even know who I'd be, what I'd be, or where I'd be without coffee. Anybody relate? 5 of you, good. Okay, well, that's my confession today. I don't know where I'd be without coffee. Let's pray. No, listen, it's so great to be with you. I'm so thankful that you chose to spend part of your Canada Day weekend here with us. And for those of you at home or watching, maybe from Cottage joining us online, we're thrilled that you're here with us. And for those who are maybe watching or listening later, we're so thankful that you're able to do that because of technology. But today, we're in part 3 of this series that we started a few weeks ago called Confessions of a Pastor. And in this series, for those of you who've missed any or all of it, in this series, basically what I'm trying to do is debunk the pastor's mystique. The pastor's mystique, this idea, you might not know what you've called it, but most people, if not all people, maybe even you, have this thing in your heart and in your mind called the pastor's mystique. It's this idea that while people don't believe their pastors are perfect, people do believe and expect that their pastor is better than the average person. That people, maybe you believe that myself or other pastors that you've known, that, we don't struggle, we don't doubt, we don't question, we always pray, we like everybody, we like coming to church every Sunday, even on long weekends. Like, I assure you, none of that is true. At least for me, none of that is true. And so if you've missed any or all of this series, this is basically a series. This is an honest look. I can't speak for other pastors, but this is an honest look at this pastor's heart. And in this series, I'm sharing some things I struggle with. I'm sharing some things I question, some of my doubts, some of my fears. So far in this series, I've confessed openly that I feel completely inadequate. I mean completely, and still feel completely inadequate to be not just a pastor, but to be your pastor. You are an incredible church community, and I feel completely inadequate to be your pastor. I also shared last week how I feel in many different ways, and I confess this at so many different times in my life, and it's more than I can count, and certainly more than I'd like to admit. I have questioned, as a pastor, I've questioned the sovereignty of God. I questioned that. At different times in my life, for various reasons, I've questioned the sovereignty of God, this idea that God has the right and the power to do whatever he decides to do. I struggle with that. I question that. I question God's control. And I shared that with you last week. And today, as difficult as those confessions were to make, and not to, pass, those away as if they were nothing, the confession that I'm about to make today, I don't want to do it, to be quite honest. I wish there was about 100 other places I could be right now. This is the last thing I want to talk about. This is the last thing I want to confess. Not just because it's awkward and uncomfortable, but honestly, because as a man, as a pastor, I'm ashamed to admit this. I'm ashamed to make this confession, but you made your way here on Canada Day weekend, and so I feel like I owe it to you. And what else are we going to do? So let's just rip the Band-Aid off. Here's my confession. I confess that I struggle to remain sexually pure. There it is. Oh, that's hard. I struggle to remain sexually pure. Wow. As hard as it is to admit that, even to myself, saying those words out loud for you to hear. I mean, think about this. This is on the internet. Like, this is out there for the world to see. And there it is. I, Scott Landry, struggle to remain sexually pure. I promise you, I wish confessing about my addiction and need for coffee was all I had to say today. Like, I wish I had something else to share, something else to confess. I wish I could talk about anything other than this. I really do. I wish I had a different story. I wish my story was pure. I wish I could tell you that when I became a pastor, all sexual temptations disappeared. That God somehow supernaturally shielded my eyes, my body, and my mind from, all these different things, and that all those past sinful mistakes and memories all disappeared, and that, my temptation to look at things I shouldn't look at just faded away, and that all of a sudden, somehow, supernaturally, my mind was pure and holy like Christ. Like, I wish I could tell you all of that, but I can't, because it's not true. And I understand very few people today talk about sexual purity, especially in churches. When it is talked about, oftentimes it's that superficial, out of touch, watered down thing, or sometimes it's like the heavy-handed opposite, like the extreme that's like, sex is bad. Anybody ever, I don't know, you're in church, maybe you had a church experience where sex is bad, it's only for procreation, don't you dare enjoy it, like that kind of message. Not here. Right off the top, I'll tell you really quickly, God wants you to have great sex. Like, aren't you glad you came? true, that's a biblical fact. God wants you to have it, but listen, we gotta lighten the mood in here. It's super awkward, right? Like, are you like, wow, I'm so glad I came to church today. Yeah. Some of you got bribed here with Swiss Chalet and you're thinking, I just thought I was coming to church and then we were going to lunch and this guy, this is the last, try being me, okay? You're not up here. This is incredibly awkward. I get it. You got to do it, right? Because in these moments, it's so tense. It's such a taboo subject. And to come into, nobody talks about this thing. And I get it. It's really awkward. It's uncomfortable. I hate admitting this. I hate confessing this, but it's a fact. And my hope in sharing this isn't to make everybody uncomfortable, because some of what I'm going to say is going to embarrass you. Some of what I'm going to say is going to make you smile. Some of it's going to make you uncomfortable, which it already is. Some of you are like, what time is it? When are we done? When it's shut this thing down. I get all that. I get all that. And my hope isn't just to embarrass you. My hope isn't to make you feel uncomfortable. I'm willing to do all of that if at the end of this time together, you walk out of here, maybe, just maybe, my story having resonated a little bit with yours, and maybe, just maybe, you would walk out not just uncomfortable, but maybe, just maybe, you'd walk out these doors with just a little bit of hope. Hope that maybe your story could take a shift. That maybe, just maybe, some of the things that you've been struggling with that you would never want to stand up and admit might begin to shift or change in your life. So I'm willing to be as uncomfortable as this is going to get with the hope that something might happen for you. My childhood could probably be characterized as intense curiosity about the opposite sex. That's my life, characterized by intense curiosity about the opposite sex. Most kids start out that way, but my intense, innocent, childlike curiosity turned over the years into consuming intentionality. Consuming intentionality. It started out with Barbie. My cousin had a room full of Barbies, all with immaculate outfits and disproportionate, stuff. And she, Barbie, was the first woman I ever undressed. Right? She had all these immaculate outfits and we were playing Barbies with my cousin and I took her clothes off and I liked it. The fact that she was plastic made no difference to me. See where this is going? I remember when the Sears catalog used to show up to my house. Anybody remember the Sears catalog? The winter Christmas wish book was the highlight of the year. Remember that? And it would show up to my house, and some of you're like, what is he talking about? You're young enough to not know this. I came from a simpler time. I grew up in what you might consider a dark time. There was a department store called Sears, and they would send a catalog to my house for free, and it would come to my house, and every Christmas, it was the wish book, and at the back of this catalog, it had pictures of everything you could order from this store, and at the back of it were pages and pages and pages of all the toys, and I would look at these pages every day. Kids like me, we would look at them every single day, and we would circle the things that we wanted, circle the things that we were wishing for. I'd even fold the corners of the pages down that had the toy that I wanted, hoping that somehow Santa might know and be able to find it easier, and I just wished and I wished. And as much as I loved doing that, and as much as I loved looking at all those pages of toys, there were some other pages in that catalog that I liked looking at almost as much. Oh yeah, about halfway through this catalog, there were pictures, get this, there were pictures of women's underwear. And not just women's underwear, pictures of women wearing nothing else but this underwear. And it came to my house for free. I didn't have to subscribe to anything. It just showed up. I didn't have to pay for anything. I didn't have to walk awkwardly into a convenience store and be like, buy, 3 things of Slim Jims and then ask for the magazine. I didn't have to do any of that. It was at my house. And here's the amazing thing. Here's what Sears did for me. Not only did they give me this amazing wish book at Christmas, but they gave me catalogs other times of the year. In fact, they had a swimsuit edition. Every summer there was pictures of not only underwear, but also, I love Sears. It's tragic it went under. I can remember growing up that a lot of my friends, their families had cable TV. And the cable TV package that they subscribed to came with, not free, they paid for them, but movie channels that only had R-rated movies. Now, we didn't have that in my home growing up. In my home growing up, the TV that worked sat on top of the one that didn't. And we just had a few basic channels. And so all those movie channels, they were encrypted and the images were really blurry. But I discovered if you looked at those blurry images long enough, every now and then, for just a split second, you could see something amidst all the blur that looked like a naked grown-up doing sexual things It would only be for a split second, and then the images would become blurry again. I love the blurry channels. I got issues, right? Like you can see that growing up, like, oh yeah, you had an intense curiosity about the opposite sex. And I did, and it was fairly innocent compared to kids today. I mean, children today, teens today, they don't have to look at blurry images and they don't have to wait for Sears to send them a catalog. They have access to high definition, not blurry images, high definition 4K pornography in an instant. It's easier for them to access than ever before. I read a statistic that said 9 out of 10 children, you following me? 9 out of 10 children between the ages of 8 and 16 have seen pornography online. And they shared in this survey, they shared openly, thinking it was private, they shared that many of them had found this pornography online mistakenly, accidentally, as they were doing their homework. Isn't that amazing? For me, I don't remember exactly what age I was, but it was fairly young in life. And my first exposure to pornography happened at my babysitter's house when her son, who was older than me, showed me a magazine. He somehow stumbled across his father's secret stash of Playboy magazines, and he shared this discovery with me. Together, we looked at these pages just like in awe. Like there was this like adrenaline-thrilled rush that was just, turning every page. And I'd never done drugs, but it was like kind of, that must have been what it was like. Like we were both wide-eyed and like there was just this hormone-charged thrill of looking at these off-limit pictures. I could still see those images vividly in my mind when I went home that day. It was as if they were like hard, burned into the hard drive of my mind. So much so that all these years later, I can still see those images. I'm 45 years old, can barely remember where I leave my keys half the time, but when I close my eyes, I can still picture 1986 as Miss February. Right? It's like all these years later, like that moment of innocence and purity and just kind of accidental, moment that happened in my life, it pushed me down a slippery slope that led to years and years and years and years of intentional sin. That I was to the place in my life where my desires, not my will, my desires were driving my behavior. I pursued sinful, selfish, sexual satisfaction. I'm going to spare you the details because it's uncomfortable enough as it is in here. I'm going to spare you the details, but I'm going to tell you it got ugly really, really, really quickly. You fast forward a number of years and a lot of broken promises to myself, to God, a lot of broken promises and a lot of failed attempts to get past this later. There I am. I'd prayed the same prayer so many times. Maybe it's a prayer you've prayed even if you're not a pastor. I prayed, God, take this away from me. God, I hate this. God, I don't want to do this. God, what's wrong? Like, God, do this. And I meant every word of those prayers, but nothing happened. And I would find myself back in similar moments of insatiable desire and heartbreaking guilt. I asked myself continually, I asked God, why can't I get victory over this in my life? Like, what's going on here? Why do I feel this way? Why am I doing this? I don't want to do it. What's wrong with me? Kept asking those things, kept asking, praying those prayers. But I couldn't escape, and I meant every word of them. And as hard as I prayed and as much as I prayed, I couldn't get past this power that pornography had in my life, and it ended up playing a key role. It was a key factor. It wasn't the only factor, but it was certainly a key factor in my life falling apart that I talked about last week. And if you missed last week, about 14 years ago, my life completely fell apart. Everyone and everything that mattered to me was gone. I had nothing. And in this wake of destruction that I'd created for myself, amidst all the rubble, as I was trying to put my life back together, it was in that moment of like, I had just this clarity. It's like, something's got to give. Something's got to change. What am I missing here? What am I doing wrong? Like, I've prayed this prayer. I really mean it. Jesus, I need you. God, I want you to take, I was like, something's got to change. I'm missing something along the way. So when I met Lisa, my wife, I shared this with her. I told her everything that I've just told you, and believe me, much, much, much more. That was a fun conversation, let me tell you. For those of you that know Lisa, this would not come as a shock to you, but for those of you who aren't lucky enough or fortunate enough to know her yet, when I shared this with her, she was so gracious. I mean, this woman loves the Lord. For some reason, she loves me. And as I shared this with her, she was just so gracious. She was supportive. But she also had the faith to believe that there could be victory in my life. And she believed in the God who could deliver me from this bondage. So I shared that with her, and she's walked with me through this ever since. I talked to a couple of friends, good friends, about this, and I'm thankful to be able to stand here and say to you that the Lord has done an incredible work in my heart and in my life. And while I'm not shackled to this sin or to this bondage in the same way that I was all those years ago, to God be the glory. He is the one who gets that glory for what has happened in my life. But as real as that is, I can honestly stand here and say, well, he's done a work in my life. There are still moments where I think to myself, Scott, what's wrong with you? Scott, what's wrong with you? I love Jesus. I love my wife. And yet there's still something in me I confess to you that at times, I want to look. I still struggle with this. I'm not past it. I'm not beyond it. It's still a tension. It's still a struggle. It's still a battle that I fight every single day of my life. And I've talked to so many different people about this over the years. I've talked to friends. I've talked to other people in ministry. I've talked to a lot of different people. You know what's amazing to me? Actually, it's a shock to me how many people have said to me, you know what, Scott, you're too open about this. And you're too worried about this. Come on. Scott, it's not really that big a deal. I mean, looking at that stuff, it's not, everybody does it. It's not really that big a deal. It doesn't hurt anybody. I beg to differ. Somebody tells me they don't believe it hurts. And I'm like, man, I've been doing ministry. I've been a professional Christian for 23 years. 23 years I've been doing this. And I've told you this many times. And if you haven't heard me say this, you'll probably hear me say it many, many times the longer you know me or the longer you attend the church. In 23 years of ministry, 50%, at least 50% of the conversations I have, the pastoral conversations, the pastoral care conversations, pastoral counseling, whatever you want to call it, 50% of those conversations with individuals or couples is centered around personal finances. 50% of them. And the other almost 50%, not quite the 50%, but almost the other 50% is speaking to couples or individuals about sexual struggles or sexual addiction. It astounds me that almost 100% of the pastoral conversations or the pastoral counseling that I do is centered around two issues, both of which the Lord in the scriptures has already spoken to. That blows my mind. It's almost as if there are those of us, even within the Christian community, those who might call themselves followers of Jesus, it's as if there's something that God has said, but we've chosen to do it differently. It's if, thanks for talking about that, God, but I got this. I'm smart enough to figure this out on my own. I know what's best for me. I can figure this out. I'm smart enough to come to my own conclusions, and I'm gonna go my own way. And then we wonder why we end up in so much trouble when we do that. And I'm not being critical. I'm not being judgmental, because this is me. I've certainly in 23 years seen the damage and the destruction pornography does in people's lives and in people's hearts and in people's families, but I've lived it. I've literally lived it. I have hurt the people that I love and care about the most by the decisions that I've made and the choices that I've made, the things that I've done. I've hurt myself. I've put myself in a position where I would look in the mirror and hated what I see. I have so much guilt and so much shame, and it just weighs me down, changes the way I live my life. It hurt my view and my relationship with God, because I got to the place in my own journey as a Christian, as a follower of Jesus, where I said, hey, if I prayed the prayer and if I meant the prayer and God didn't just take this struggle away from me, maybe he's not real. Because if he was real, he would take this. Doesn't he love me? If he doesn't want me to do this, why wouldn't he just take it? Or the other conclusion I made at different parts is maybe the Bible's wrong. Maybe they got the translation wrong. Somewhere in the Greek and the Hebrew, they got it mixed up. Maybe God doesn't really care about this. Because if he did care about this and I asked him to take it away from me and he doesn't want me to do this, why doesn't he take it away? So see, I've seen the damage that pornography does. I've lived it. And so because of all of that and coming out on the other side, sexual purity is a big, big deal to me. It's a big deal to me. I talk openly about it. I have friends that I talk to about this. I talk to Lisa, but we talk about this all the time because I've discovered in my own experience and in the things I've seen in 23 years of ministry, it's not just a big deal to me. The consequences are serious, but I've seen the destruction it leaves when we get outside of God's plan and God's desire for our lives. So I wanted to know, what does God have to say about this? What does God have to say to this? And I realized that it is a big deal to God. The Apostle Paul understood this. You've heard me talk about Paul. Paul, I call him the godfather of the early church. He was the one that was responsible for taking the name and the message of Jesus Christ to the known world. He planted churches all over the Mediterranean rim as a way of sending the name of Jesus forward into the world. Thankfully, because of Paul, we have the church today, and he wrote to a group of people just like us, a church community in a place called Ephesus, and he wrote this letter to them. In light of everything that was going on in the world, this is what Paul says about this very subject. Look what he says. He says, among you, not talking about the world, not talking about culture, because the world culture has its own way of operating, and I'm not gonna get into that. But among you, among this Christian church community, amongst those who claim to follow Jesus, to be ambassadors of his name, among you, there must not be even a hint of sexual immorality. I don't know about you, that seems a little bit much, a little bit severe, a little too serious, right? What does that even mean, a hint of sexual immorality? It's a great question. I'm glad you asked. Before I get to the hint part for me, let's talk about sexual immorality. What does that even mean? What is sexual immorality? Listen, I've wrestled with this, trying to figure out for myself, not for you, but for myself. I needed a definition. I needed to understand when I read this, what does this have to say to Scott, the man, the pastor? And what I've come to understand, what I've come to embrace is this. God has a design and a desire for my sexuality and my sexual activity. God has a design and a desire for my sexuality and my sexual activity. And sexual immorality for me is anything that goes outside of that design and that desire. Anything that goes on outside of that design, anything that perverts the purity that God intended, anything that distorts the design that God created, anything outside of that is sexual immorality for me. So what does a hint of sexual immorality mean in my context, in the midst of my journey, in the midst of my struggle? For me, I would say that looking at images, online lustfully, looking at images on Instagram, looking at websites, looking at magazines, looking at shows on Netflix or HBO, any of those things, looking at that lustfully, I would say that's north of a hint. I would say that looking at people at the coffee shop, all those things, the hint north of, right? That's what it means for me. And so sexual immorality, you look at this, Paul's writing this, and it seems like, oh man, that's just way too severe. That's way too serious. Like, come on, what are you talking about? That's Paul, right? Some people are like, well, that's Paul. What does Paul know? That's just, some guy. I only listen to Jesus. If it's not in the red letters in the Bible, I don't listen. Like I've heard people say that all the time. I only listen to what Jesus said. Everybody outside of that is just a man. I only listen to, okay. Jesus goes even further than Paul does. So if you want to use, let's just go back to Jesus. Jesus is speaking about this, and here's what he said. Watch this. This is just a little much. But I tell you that anyone, not just pastors, anyone, you and I, anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Whew, that's a steep curve. I don't know if I can live up to that, right? And I hear people say the opposite. People say, oh, what's the big deal? I'm just window shopping. I'm not buying anything. I'm just having a look. And I get that because you're trying to sell yourself on that. You're trying to tell yourself, you're trying to justify, you're trying to convince to yourself what I've done. I'm not hurting anyone. I'm just looking. I'm not actually doing anything. But listen, I've been in conversations with couples where the person who thinks that way is trying to sell that nonsense to their partner, and it doesn't work. See, you might be able to convince yourself of that, but I guarantee you the person that's sitting across from me won't take it that way. And to them, they would echo what Jesus says. I've seen it. That to them, oh, you might not have actually had intercourse with someone else, but I feel that same level of betrayal just by what you've looked at. I feel betrayed. I've seen the damage. I've lived through it. I've experienced it. And Jesus saw that. And so he says, look, if you even look at someone like that in your heart, it's the same thing. And in the heart of the person you would say you love, it's the same thing. And so when I look at the words of Paul, when I look at the words of Jesus, and there are so many other verses, we could spend 14 hours looking at this stuff. It's clear sexual purity is a big deal. It's a big deal, and it's a big deal to me. Why? Because the stakes are so high. If I were to fall into sexual temptation, right, I would break God's heart. I would break his heart and I would drag his name through the mud. And someday when I stand face to face with my Heavenly Father, I would have to answer for all of those sinful actions. If I were to fall into sexual sin, I would certainly break God's heart, but I'd also break Lisa's heart. I'd break her heart. I'd run the risk of losing my family. My reputation as a pastor would be ruined. Everyone and everything that matters most to me could be destroyed in a moment. And the same is true for every single one of you in this room and every single one of you at home. The same is true for you. That's why I'm confessing this. It's not because I got anything to gain. In fact, I'm guessing there are those of you that are looking at me differently because I'm sharing this with you. There's nothing for me to gain, but I want something for you. I don't want you to experience the consequences I've experienced in my life. I don't want you to experience the consequences I've seen so many people experience in the course of their lifetime. So I'm confessing this. I'm sharing this with you. I want to share with you, and I'm sharing with you why this is such a big deal to me. And for the remainder of our time, I want to share what the Lord has done in my life, because I'm thankful and I give God all the praise and all the glory that I can stand up here and in all sincerity say that over the last number of years, for many, many years, I've lived with a level of sexual purity that I never imagined possible and had never experienced before. And it's to God be the glory. I'm not gonna get up here and try to pretend that I'm still not tempted, because as I've said, I am, just as you're gonna be tempted. See, the thing that you need to understand and the thing that I continually need to hold on to in my heart is this: it is not a sin to be tempted. It's not a sin to be tempted. It's how you respond to temptation that matters. That's what matters. All of us will be tempted. It's how you respond in those moments of temptation that matters. And so I'm not gonna pretend like I've arrived. This is an ongoing battle for me, as it will be for you. But what I can tell you is that God has given me proven biblical principles that work. They're not easy to live by, I tell you that. They're not easy to live by, but they are effective. And so with the remainder of our time, I wanna share what the Lord has shown me and what I continue to try to live by in my journey of trying to be sexually pure. To do that, I want to take you into the scriptures for a few moments. I want to take you to a famous story. And the reason I've chosen this story is because it's such a familiar story. My guess is even if you've never really been to church, you've heard some version of this story. It's known in culture fairly well. And the reason I use this is because it's such a known story. I don't have to spend a lot of time unpacking the story. We can just get to it and try to extract the principles that are found in this story. It's the story of a man named David. David and Goliath. That same David is now a king, and it's this famous story called David and Bathsheba. You've heard the story, I'm guessing, in some way, shape, or form. And the amazing thing about this story is that in this story about David, and I'll start with this. This is the David who you know about the giant Goliath, but here's something else. God himself testified concerning David, and here's what he said: I have found David, son of Jesse, a man after my own heart. I wanted to start there because it's comforting for me as a man and as a pastor to know that someone after God's own heart could stumble and fall the way that I have. That's comforting to me. And in this story that we're gonna look at, that many of you, if not all of you, know in some way, shape, or form, in four verses of the Bible, we see how David's life was turned completely upside down in one fateful moment of decision. And here's what we discover as we look at this story. We discover not only what turned his life upside down, we discover four principles in these four verses. And my hope is that as we look at these together, the wisdom that you will gain will help protect you from experiencing the consequences that David experienced in his story. It says this: in the springtime, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with king's men and the whole army. They all go off to war, and they destroyed the Ammonites. They had victory. They besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. In a time when every king went off to war, David stayed behind. Temptation has a way of finding the person who's in the wrong place. Let me say that again. Temptation has a way of finding the person who's in the wrong place. Where are you most tempted? When are you most tempted? You need to know, because the best defense is avoiding those tempting situations and moments completely. Don't apologize for it, or you'll apologize later for it. The first principle that we see in David's story is an obvious one. It's a simple one, but it's an important one, probably the most important of all. We need to watch for temptation. You need to watch for temptation. I need to watch for temptation. We have to be on the lookout. We have to be mindful of and ready for moments of temptation. For me, it's not a matter of if I'm gonna be tempted, it's taking action plans now for the moments that I can anticipate I'm gonna be tempted. I don't meet with anyone of the opposite sex in this building if there's not someone else in the building and someone aware of that meeting. I don't do it. I don't ride in a car alone with people of the opposite sex that aren't in my family. Don't do it. I have a friend who has access to my phone, and so does Lisa, at any time, no questions asked, right? And you might hear those things and think, oh, that's kind of weird. But listen, I want to avoid tempting situations because I know if I don't have an action plan, if I'm not aggressive about it on the front end, it's going to be even more difficult to resist those temptations later. And so that's what I do. And some of you, especially men, you're sitting there hearing, I don't need to do that. That sounds a little bit much. Don't need to do that. I get that. You're like, I'm stronger than that. I don't need anyone to monitor my devices or monitor my activity. Like I'm strong. Like I get, you may be stronger than that. Or maybe that's your pride talking. Maybe you're not being honest with yourself about how vulnerable you really are. Maybe you're kind of living on the edge of danger. And maybe you're thinking, Scott, you're being a little over dramatic right now. I don't care. I'm telling you this, I'm saying this because I care. I don't want any of you to experience the consequences that David is about to experience, the consequences I've experienced. I've seen far too many good people slide down into destruction because of their own pride, because of their own arrogance, because they weren't willing to acknowledge or admit their vulnerability and they weren't watching for temptation. David certainly wasn't, and so the story goes on and tells us this. One evening, David got up from his bed and walked around on the roof of the palace. Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't it be nice just to get up in the night and strut around your own? No, anyway. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. Ooh, right? The woman, who we don't know yet, the woman was very beautiful. It is not a sin to notice a beautiful person. You're off the hook. It's not a sin to notice a beautiful person. It is a sin to notice and notice and notice and notice. That's what David did, right? It says that he saw a woman bathing. The Hebrew word for saw is the word ra'ah. It means viewing upon with an extended gaze for enjoyment. In other words, he lusted. Right? You can see a beautiful person. It's one thing to say, oh, he or she is a really good looking person. It's another thing to ra'ah, right? Ra'ah. Like I want something. You get the picture, right? And the picture is this. You have to watch out for temptation, but you also have to watch what you watch. You gotta watch what you watch. The more you watch, the more you want to watch. And I'm not just talking about internet pornography. Sexual temptation comes in all forms and from everywhere imaginable. I've talked to friends who ra'ah over the Victoria's Secret catalog. I've talked to friends who have ra'ah'd over graphic shows on HBO. I've talked to people who ra'ah at the gym, who lust at church. I've talked to so many people over the years, couples over the years, who have been taken down in their marriages, in their relationships because of beginnings that had what most people would say are acceptable. Chat rooms, social media conversations, social media pictures, Netflix, romance novels, reality shows, all of this stuff. What do you watch? What do you listen to that you know you shouldn't? Not because of what it is, but because of where it leads you. You got to acknowledge that. You have to watch what you watch. You will never be free until you do. Watch what you watch. David was watching Bathsheba, and the story goes on. The woman was very beautiful, and David acted. David sent someone to find out about her. The messenger comes back and says, she is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, and the wife of Uriah the Hittite. And when David heard this, then David sent messengers to get her. These messengers were probably afraid of disobeying the king's order, but a real friend would have walked up to David and said, David, she's married. That's another man's wife. This is wrong. Don't do this. See, good people in the wrong situation can be bad company. Good people in the wrong situation can still be bad company. If you walk with the wrong people, you'll end up doing the wrong things. You just will. If you've got friends in your life, if you've got people that are close to you that are constantly talking unwholesome, ungodly things, or trash talking their wives, they're flirting with people that are not in a relationship, they might not be hurting you, but they're certainly influencing you. And if you've got a friend who is a source of sexual temptation in your life, you're walking with and toward trouble. One of the keys to trying to live a pure life in my life is having, consistent, intentional accountability. I'm not talking about some casual breakfast every once in a while. I'm talking real friends ask you the hard questions and they don't settle for cliche answers. They just don't. You have to watch out for temptation. You have to watch what you watch, but you also have to watch who you walk with. You've got to watch who you walk with. You have to invest in relationships, good relationships. David's messengers were on the payroll, but he wasn't investing in relationships that mattered and that he needed. You have to invest in friendships, relationships. You need to be and do life with people who are gonna tell you what you need to know, not what you wanna hear. And David didn't do that. Even though he was a king, he sends his messengers, his errand boys, the people that just did what he told them to do to get Bathsheba, and they did. And here's what happened, you know it. She came to him and he slept with her. 9 words sum up his failure. But he had blown past several moments of smaller decisions along the way, and therein lies the 4th principle. You have to watch out for temptation. You have to watch what you watch. You have to watch who you walk with, and you have to watch for moments of decision. Not just the critical moments of decision, but the smaller moments of decision along the way. He wasn't where he was supposed to be. He looked, he saw, and then he rahad, right? He rahad, then he schemed, then he acted, then he seduced her, all the time justifying it. And at any point along the way, he could have stopped and done the right thing. And so can you, and so can I. I don't know what you struggle with. You may not be a pastor. You have your own story. You have your own chains. You have your own, I don't know what it is for you. Maybe you've had an affair. Maybe you're having one right now, or you're dangerously close. Maybe, to quote Jesus, you're constantly committing adultery in your heart and mind because of the things you see. Maybe you're addicted to fantasizing and masturbation. I said that in church. Maybe you're consumed with these images. Maybe you're consumed with websites and you can't find victory. You can't find control over it. I get it all. And all of us have these small, seemingly insignificant moments of decision along the way that lead to the critical one. And if we don't find a way to win victory and have victory in these small moments, if we lose the battle, we lose the war. And today, for you, just like me, your greatest battle may be against yourself. Your greatest battle may be against yourself. And if you're trapped, the first step for you, the most important step for you, if you're ever gonna experience victory in your life, the first step is confession. And I certainly don't mean just confessing to God, though that's certainly a part of it. It begins there. Ultimately, it always begins there. You need to confess to God, but I had done that so many times and nothing happened. And the reason nothing happened wasn't that God wasn't real. It was that I wasn't doing what I was told to do in the scriptures. James, the brother of Jesus, understood this, and he said this, confess your sins to each other. And I'm like, nope. Time out. I don't do that, right? I confess my sins to God, not to anybody else. And James is like, no, that's an important part of it. You gotta do that, but confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that for the purpose of healing, so that you may be healed. Forgiven by God, but healed so that you can take a step forward, so that you can live a different life, be healed, be renewed, be restored. Confess to one another. See, something powerful happens when we go from confessing our sin to God and we find ourselves in the type of community where we can be honest and vulnerable and confess that sin one to another and to find grace with one another. It's in that moment where we shine a big old spotlight of truth on these things that want to be hidden in the dark, that something begins to happen and something begins to change. And so I ask you, who do you need to confess to? First and foremost, God for sure, but who else? And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, I'm not doing that. There is no way in the world I'm doing that. Absolutely not. This is just, it's not that big. Listen, I've made all the excuses. I've made them all and paid for them all because I wasn't doing what the scriptures were clear about. In order for me to experience healing, it's the same thing for you. You gotta take the step of going from talking and confessing to God to confessing it to someone else, because that's how and when we begin to experience healing. And so again, I wanna ask you, who do you need to talk to? Your spouse? A friend? So here's the thing, and I can tell you from years of experience and more than that, personal experience, that person that you need to talk to, they're gonna find out eventually. And you're either gonna confess to them with a sense of shame and humiliation and embarrassment and fear, or you're gonna confess it when it's too late and where you might lose everything. And your fear of losing everything on the front end, it could actually be a reality when it's too late. So who do you need to confess to? I want to give you just a moment, everyone in here, and if you're at home, you can do this too, no matter who you're with or where you are, but I just want to invite everybody just to bow your heads, close your eyes, and there's nothing mystical about doing this. There's nothing about closing your eyes and bowing your head that makes prayer work. It's literally just a way of eliminating the distractions in the room and for you being with your own thoughts and being with the Lord in that space. You know, the whole time I've been talking about this, you're like, I need this to be over, because you know in your heart what this is for you. So what is it you need to confess to God? No, you're like, I've already done that before and it's not, I know, just hang with me. What is it that you need to confess to God? You don't need my words, use your own. What do you need to confess to him? Whatever it is, do it right now. God knows, God cares. What is it? God. Everyone, you just look at me real quick. We're almost done. Just look at me real quick. As uncomfortable as this, look at me. Those of you at home, just hang on. Now, who do you need to talk to? Who do you need to talk to? You already know. You already know. And you're like, there's no way in the world I'm doing that. And I get that. I really, really do. But I promise you, the light of confession is what is going to take you a step forward towards change and towards healing. And as uncomfortable as it may be, I'm telling you, you gotta do it. You've gotta do it. Whoever that is, do it today. Do not let the sun set on another day without talking to that person. I want to pray for you right now that you would have the courage and the strength to have that uncomfortable conversation today. Don't make excuses. Well, it's a long weekend. Today. Do it today. You will not do it today. I want to pray that you'd have the courage and the strength to do that. And I also want to pray, there's some of you right now, you are the person, you at home, you are the person that someone that you love, know, care about, you are the person that they're going to talk to. Someone is going to talk to you, and I want to pray that you would have the courage and the strength and the grace to listen. It's going to be uncomfortable. You're not going to want to hear what you're going to hear. It may be painful to you to hear it, but the reason that person hasn't talked to you, the reason they are talking to you is because how important you are to them. But the reason they haven't talked to you up until now is because fear has shackled them in place. And they are deathly afraid of what might happen if those words get out. They're deathly afraid of what you might do, what you might not do, what you might say, what you might not say. And that fear has kept them hidden. And I pray that you would have the grace and the strength to allow the light of confession to be shone, as painful and as uncomfortable it is, so that there could be healing. Oh, I pray for you. I pray for you. For all of us. Whether you're the person who needs to talk to someone or the person who needs to listen to someone, let me pray for you. Heavenly Father, I thank you for this opportunity to share in this place, to be able to open up my story and to share it with everyone as they continue to live and write their own. And God, you know every single person in this room. You know every single person on the other side of that camera. You know their struggles. You know their journeys. You know their pain. You know their shame. You know the bondage and the chains that have shackled them. God, you know it all. And God, I pray that you, oh Lord, would show yourself to each one. That God, they would certainly go to you in confession, but God, that you would give them the courage and the strength to confess to someone else. Give them the courage and the strength to take that step. And for those that are going to hear, God, give them the courage and the strength and the grace to be willing to listen so that there might be healing. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Before you go, just one more thing. Just hang with me. Just one more thing. Sexual temptation, it's dangerous. The statistics are overwhelming. I read a recent study, 60% of men and 40% of women regularly consume pornography. And the church, the people of faith, we are not immune to that tension, to that temptation, to that struggle. We are not immune to it. We're not. This struggle, this temptation, it reminds me of what the Inuit do when there's a predatory wolf who's endangering their village. What they do is they will go out and they will hunt a rabbit or a squirrel, and they will take a sharp double-edged blade and they will dip that blade into the blood of that animal. And they will allow the cold air to freeze that blood to this double-sided blade. Then they will take that knife and they will bury it with the handle of the blade into the ground. They'll firmly pack it into the ground with the blood-soaked blade being visible, being exposed to the air. In the evening, inevitably, a wolf will smell that blood and it will come to investigate. And as it gets closer to the blood, it smells it, the more it wants it, and it will come right up to the blade and it will begin to lick that blade. The frozen blood and the cold metal will numb the wolf's tongue. And quickly it begins to taste its own warm blood. And the more it tastes its own warm blood, the more that it wants it, and it begins to lick faster and faster and faster and faster, not realizing that with every lick, he's slicing and shedding his own tongue more and more. And eventually, before the wolf can realize what's happened, before all the damage has been done, he's done that damage to himself, and it's too late. Graphic? Yep. Gross? Yep. But what an accurate analogy illustrating what happens to those of us who walk into the shadows of sexual darkness. Nobody wakes up in the morning saying, you know what? I think I'm going to ruin my life today. My life is going pretty good. I like how things are. I think I'm going to go out and do something stupid and ruin my life. Nobody does that. Neither did David. Neither did I. But that's how real this is. Today is the day, and I'm begging you, whoever it is you need to talk to, whatever it is you need to talk to someone about, do not let the sun set on another opportunity for you to shine the light of confession on what you have kept hidden in the dark. Would you stand with me? Rather than going out of here on a lullaby or some slow song, that's I want us to go out on an anthem. I want us to go out with a proclamation. I want us to go out with our head held high and our confidence in the God who saves, the God who promises healing and victory, but invites us to play a part in that by confession. I want you to join me and sing at the top of your lungs about this great God, because the battle ultimately belongs to Him. And I believe the battle that's been won in my life because of Him can be won in yours. So let's sing this song together, The Battle Belongs.
Well, amen. Next week, we're wrapping up this series looking at what the Pastor Scott thinks of the church. Should be a good one. Hope we'll see you next week. On your way out, we have some freezies. We thought it'd be a fun way to just kind of celebrate the start of summer. We did have that planned before the Frozen sword story, but we hope you'll enjoy it anyway. See you next week.